The Galactic Council chamber was not built for silence. For centuries it had been filled with arguments, shouts, and the endless noise of politicians trying to control the galaxy. The curved walls were made of silver stone that carried every sound like thunder. Rows of tall marble seats stretched upward in a perfect circle, each one occupied by powerful counselors from the most advanced species across the stars. The center of the hall held a single platform where galactic decisions were made, where deals were signed, where entire civilizations were judged. But now, for the first time in 1,000 years, that place was quiet, so quiet that you could hear the faint hum of the old lights above their heads. On the massive screen suspended above the chamber, a single signal was still playing. It was the last human transmission. It wasn't a speech, it wasn't a threat, it wasn't a war cry. It was just a silent feed with a soft white light pulsing like a heartbeat. And at the bottom of the screen, glowing in red, there was a countdown, cold, steady, unstoppable. The digits ticked down 1 second at a time. The sound of the timer felt like a hammer striking their chests. Tick, tick, tick. The counselors stared at it with wide eyes. None of them spoke. Their usual arrogance sat crushed beneath an unfamiliar weight, fear. They had always called humans loud, emotional, unpredictable, reckless. They mocked their short lives, their hunger for discovery, their stubborn defiance. They never took them seriously, not even when humanity built one of the most powerful defense fleets in the known galaxy. Not even when human colonies stretched far beyond the rim. They laughed at them, believing they would always remain noisy little upstarts begging for a seat at the table. But now the noise was gone, humanity had gone silent, and it was that silence that terrified them more than any weapon, because humanity's voice had always been loud enough to shake the walls of this chamber. Even when the council mocked them, humans always answered. They argued, they fought, they built, they pushed, they bled. But now, nothing, no transmission, no protest, no plea, no last-minute bargaining. Every communication beacon once operated by humans had gone dark at the same second. Their patrol routes. Empty, their colonies. Abandoned, their trade fleets. Vanished from every star map. Humanity had simply disappeared from the galactic grid like someone had erased them with a single breath. At the center of the council table sat High Speaker Velrak of the Zalari Dominion, his scales glimmering faintly under the white light. Normally his voice could command the room, but now he couldn't find the strength to speak. His black eyes stared at the countdown on the screen as if staring long enough might make it stop. It didn't. To his right sat Admiral Threya of the Seven Alliance, known for mocking humanity openly in every meeting. She had once said, "Humans bark like dogs because they know they are too weak to bite." But now her claws tapped nervously against the metal surface of the table. She leaned forward and whispered under her breath, "This can't be real." But her voice didn't reach anyone. It didn't matter if it was real or not. It was happening. The human fleet was supposed to be visible. They had always been there, filling the galaxy's outer rim with their giant dreadnoughts and fast escort ships. They kept the trade routes clean. They chased pirates. They protected colonies far from the Council's reach. They were the noisy shield everyone pretended to hate but secretly depended on. And now they were gone, leaving behind nothing but the sound of their absence. Velrak finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost human in its trembling. "Have we received anything? Any message?" One of the aides shook their heads slowly. "No, Speaker. The human network is completely offline. Their embassy channels are dead. Earth is dark." The words fell like stones into the still air. Another counselor, an elder with shimmering skin, shifted nervously in her seat. "They can't just disappear," she said, her voice cracking. "No species can disappear like that." Admiral Threya spat back. "Humans can. They always build in silence. We just never believed they could walk away." The clock on the screen reached 14 minutes and 22 seconds and kept ticking down. The light of the transmission pulsed like a heartbeat that did not belong to them anymore. Someone whispered, "What happens when it reaches zero?" And no one answered, because no one knew. In the far corner of the chamber, a young aide with pale gray skin whispered to another, "Why didn't they warn us?" His companion gave a bitter laugh. They did, for years. And it was true. Everyone in that room knew it. Humanity had begged for help when their border colonies were attacked by raiders. They sent requests for joint patrols, trade agreements, defense pacts. The Council waved it away every time. They called humans dramatic, unstable, too emotional, too loud. Velrak lowered his head. the weight of the unspoken truth pressing on his chest like a stone. This wasn't a sudden act of madness. This had been coming for years, and none of them cared to listen. Now it was too late. The chamber lights flickered briefly, causing a ripple of panic to run through the rows. Even the smallest change felt like a warning now. The countdown glared red on the screen. Merciless, one counselor tried to open a channel manually, slamming his hand against the control panel. "Broadcast emergency protocol," he barked, but all he got in return was static. Humanity had cut everything: communication, trade, security packs, embassy networks. Everything. It wasn't just leaving, it was erasing itself from their galaxy like a shadow retreating before dawn. Someone in the upper rows whispered, "They're bluffing?" Another snapped back, "Bluffing doesn't shut down entire star networks." The whispers grew louder, climbing like static electricity until Velrak slammed his fist on the table. The sharp sound echoed through the chamber. "Enough." His voice shook but held. "They are not bluffing?" The Admiral stared at him with wide, almost fearful eyes. "Then what do we do?" Velrak leaned forward, every breath heavy. "We wait." The words sank into the chamber like cold iron, and that's exactly what they did. They waited. They watched the numbers on the screen fall like sand through their fingers. Their empires built on control now helpless in front of a single countdown. At 7 minutes and 11 seconds the light of the transmission changed. No voice came through, no image of human faces, no ship logs, no hidden message, just a single star map appeared in glowing blue. It stretched beyond the known galaxy, beyond the mapped borders, deep into uncharted space. A single red line curved away from Earth, through the stars, and ended in a black region marked with one warning. "Unknown." The chamber gasped collectively. Admiral Threa whispered, "No one survives out there." But another voice, colder, sharper, answered from somewhere in the rows. "Maybe they don't need to survive. Maybe they already prepared to live there." The realization struck like a storm. Humanity hadn't died. It had left, deliberately, carefully, in silence. They had built their escape while the Council was laughing at them. 2 minutes and 54 seconds. The sound of the clock was a storm in their ears now, the weight of years of arrogance pressing down on their lungs. One of the junior officers ran toward Velrak and whispered, "Should we send our fleets? We can intercept them." Velrak stared at the map on the screen and shook his head slowly. "They are already gone," he said softly. "You cannot intercept ghosts." The final seconds ticked away. Every heartbeat in the chamber matched the red numbers on the screen. Some counselors prayed to their gods. Others whispered names of long-forgotten treaties. But nothing mattered now. The screen went black. No explosion. No threat. No warning. Just black. The transmission ended without a sound, leaving the chamber drowning in its own silence. For a long time no one moved. Their entire galaxy had depended on human trade, human fleets, human stubbornness, even if they never admitted it. And now they had to face a truth they weren't ready for. Humanity had walked away. Not because it was weak, but because it was strong enough to leave without turning back. Velrak finally leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "We have spent centuries mocking the loudest voice in the galaxy," he said. "And now that voice is gone, and the galaxy is quiet." That quiet wasn't peace. It was a warning that their safety was built on something they didn't respect, something they lost, something that was never coming back. And outside their small, trembling council chamber, far beyond the stars they controlled, humanity was moving toward a future they could no longer touch. The council chamber was still heavy with the weight of the silence that followed the blackout. But this silence was not born in a single night. It had been building for years, like a storm hiding behind calm skies, and everyone in that room knew it. They had seen the warnings long before this day came. They just chose to look away. They chose to believe the humans would never act, because in their eyes, humans always made noise but never followed through. They thought humanity needed the galaxy more than the galaxy needed humanity. And that belief had now brought them here, sitting in the cold shadows of their own arrogance. The memory of those early warnings lingered like ghosts. It started quietly years ago, with small reports that never made the front of the council agenda. A human ambassador had stood in that same chamber, face tired but eyes sharp, holding data of border colony attacks. He spoke clearly, asking for joint fleets, stronger trade defense, shared intelligence. But the chamber had laughed, soft at first, then louder, calling humans paranoid. The high speaker at that time had even leaned back in his chair and said, "Humans always see shadows where there are none." And everyone in that room had nodded. But the shadows were real. The raids on human border colonies grew bolder with every season. Cargo freighters were hijacked, stations burned, settlers killed or enslaved. Humans sent requests, hundreds of them, to form a joint defense pact. The Council ignored most of them. Some they answered with empty promises, some they dismissed entirely. Humanity patched its wounds alone, sending their own fleets to fight enemies while the Council watched from their marble towers. Then came the second warning, a louder one. The humans began to build. They expanded their industrial shipyards at a speed that made the Council uncomfortable. Their fleet grew larger, their patrol routes thicker, their stations more fortified. The Council whispered behind closed doors that the humans were becoming too ambitious, too strong, too noisy. Instead of offering help, they increased the political pressure. They told humanity to slow down, to trust the system. But the system had never lifted a finger to help them. Admiral Threa remembered it too clearly. A few years ago, she had laughed during a security briefing and said, "Humans love to scream about danger. It makes them feel important." The chamber had laughed with her. That laughter felt sour now. Her claws dug into the table as the images played in her mind like a story she wished she could rewrite. There were more warnings after that, too many to count. When the pirate warlords entered human sectors, the Council debated trade taxes instead of sending aid. When human colonies fell under siege, the Council postponed their meetings for budgetary discussions. When human fleets stood alone against enemies 3 times their size, the Council called them reckless for defending their own worlds. One by one, humanity realized what the Council truly was, a wall that only existed for those inside it. Outsiders, even if they built, even if they bled, were left to burn. And humanity was never going to forget that. Velrak stared at the dead screen, his throat tightening as fragments of old Council transcripts echoed in his memory. The Council's arrogance had not only ignored human warnings, it had mocked them. He had been there when Ambassador Cole from Earth delivered his final speech, the one that now felt like a prophecy. "One day," the ambassador had said, voice steady, "when the noise stops, you will remember that we warned you, and by then, it will be too late." Back then, the chamber erupted in laughter. Now, that same chamber trembled in silence. The aide at Velrak's side spoke carefully, almost afraid to break the thick air. "Speaker, the humans sent requests for military coordination for years. Shall I retrieve the records?" Velrak didn't need the records. He remembered the dismissive tone of every reply. "No need," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of regret. "We know what they said. We know what we didn't do." Counselor Zarek, a tall, golden-skinned being with long translucent fins on his back, shifted uncomfortably. He had once been one of the loudest voices calling humanity a childish race. Now his voice trembled. "But they wouldn't actually leave. They have too many colonies here. Too many roots." Threa turned her gaze toward him, but it wasn't a sharp look anymore. It was the hollow stare of someone who understood too late. "No," she whispered. "They had roots here. They cut them long before we noticed. We just never thought they could." Another counselor banged their fist lightly against the table, not in anger but panic. "Why didn't they tell us they were leaving?" Velrak almost laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "They did. Every ignored warning was them telling us." The chamber grew even colder as the truth settled like dust in an abandoned city. Humanity had given them every chance to stand beside them, to fight with them, to be allies. But the Council had always acted like gods sitting above a desperate child. They had mistaken patience for weakness. And now they were staring at the price of their own arrogance. A holomap flickered to life at the center of the table, a ghost signal of old trade routes. The bright lines that had once represented human merchant fleets now blinked gray and empty. Over 60% of the galaxy's outer trade depended on those routes. 60%. Without humanity, entire economies would begin to collapse within months. They built the backbone of the network, a younger counselor whispered. They built it, and we mocked them for it. Threa clenched her jaw. They built it, she said slowly. And they were the only ones who could hold it together. We just pretended it was ours. Velrak leaned forward, hands gripping the cold edge of the table. He could already see the cracks forming. Trade partners pulling away, smaller factions panicking, entire systems trembling. Humanity didn't need to attack them. By walking away, they had already dealt a blow deeper than any war fleet could. They warned us, Velrak muttered, mostly to himself. They warned us over and over, and we laughed. The Admiral's voice was low and rough. And now we're the ones choking on the silence. From the high seats came a nervous shout. So we bring them back. We call them, offer them power, offer them anything. The desperation in the voice mirrored the fear they all felt. Velrak slowly turned his gaze upward. You still don't understand, he said, his voice quiet but sharp. You cannot call someone back who no longer wants to be found. The aide tried to check the network again. The result was the same, nothing. No signal. No return channels. No hidden pathways. Humanity hadn't just closed the door. They had dismantled the entire building. This wasn't war. This was consequence. And as the counselors looked at one another, some pale with fear, some hollow with regret, they realized the truth that had been staring them in the face the entire time. Humanity didn't leave because it was weak. It left because it was done waiting. It left because it was strong enough to build its own way. The Council had been warned. Not once, not twice, but for years. And every laugh, every insult, every dismissal had led to this single, unshakable moment of silence. The silence was no longer just the absence of human voices. It was the sound of the Council finally realizing they were alone. The night the beacons died was supposed to be ordinary. Nothing in the star charts or military reports had hinted at what was about to happen. Trade routes were open, merchant fleets drifted along the space lanes, Council traffic drones hovered near human stations like they had every other day for decades. The galaxy breathed its usual rhythm of commerce, politics, and arrogance. But hidden beneath that ordinary night was something vast and silent, a decision humanity had already made. It began with a small flicker, a faint dimming in one of the outer communication relays. First, no one cared. A Council technician at the central relay station simply logged the report, thinking it was a sensor glitch. But then another beacon dimmed. Then another. Then 20. Then 100. Within minutes, entire sections of the human communication network were going dark like candles being snuffed out one by one. Inside the Council's central operations hub, alarms started flashing across giant transparent displays. Technicians shouted over each other in a dozen different languages, trying to reboot systems, but every connection returned the same message. Signal terminated at source. The humans weren't being jammed. They weren't under attack. They were shutting everything off themselves. Fleet traffic control reported the same thing. Merchant convoys had disappeared from scanners. Docking hubs went offline. Patrol ships vanished from every trade lane. It wasn't chaos. It was quiet, calculated, controlled. By the time Velrak reached the operations center, the floor was already swarming with aides and security officers. The holomap on the wall displayed a galaxy littered with black holes where once there had been bright beacons of human activity. Entire clusters winked out in perfect synchronization, as if following an invisible clock. One of the junior officers ran up to him, panic sharp in their voice. Speaker, they're shutting down everything, stations, relays, patrol nets. All human infrastructure is going dark at the same time. Velrak's throat felt like sand. Is it an attack? The officer shook his head. No external interference detected. This is deliberate. Deliberate. The word was heavier than metal. Another voice shouted from across the room. We've lost contact with Terra Station 1. Then another. Colony 12 just went offline. The reports flooded in so fast that even the translation grid began to stutter. It was as if humanity had erased its presence with the flick of a switch. In the council chamber, Admiral Threa stood stiff at the railing overlooking the holomap. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something she had never felt before, disbelief. "This isn't possible," she muttered. "No one can coordinate something this massive without warning." But humanity could. Humanity had. For years, the Council had laughed at human stubbornness. They called them chaotic and reckless. But behind their noise, humanity had always built things quietly. Shipyards hidden in deep orbit, encrypted relay chains outside Council jurisdiction, backup systems buried in the void. And now all of that preparation was unfolding like clockwork. The first shock came when the embassy line collapsed. Every human embassy across Council territory sent out a final silent pulse and then went dark. No final messages. No explanations. Just gone. Hundreds of diplomatic stations turned into empty shells floating in space. Dock workers at the diplomatic hub on Vorian 7 reported seeing human personnel board shuttles, launch silently, and vanish into the black before their security ships could follow. "Reroute through secondary channels," someone yelled. "There are no secondary channels," another shouted back. "They shut those down too." One by one, the comm feeds from human settlements blinked out. It wasn't random. It was precise, timed down to the second. Humanity had planned this for years. In a shadowed corner of the control room, Counselor Zarek leaned forward, his golden skin reflecting the flashing red lights. His voice shook as he whispered, "They've been planning to leave us for a long time." No one argued with him. The final blow came from the Terran core. Earth itself, the beating heart of the human network, sent one last broadcast. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a threat. Just a sound. A soft, slow pulse. A heartbeat. Then darkness. Every beacon tied to Earth followed within seconds. Terran orbital platforms powered down, their brilliant blue light fading into nothing. The human home system vanished from the grid like a ghost, taking everything it had built with it. Velrak gripped the railing as he stared at the now blackened center of the map. This wasn't war. This wasn't surrender. It was an exit. A silent, deliberate exit from a galaxy that had mocked them. A cold silence spread through the room like frost. Even the alarms seemed distant now. No one dared to speak because they all knew what this meant. Humanity had not just walked away from diplomacy, they had walked away from the galaxy itself. Admiral Threya finally broke the silence, her voice dry and unsteady. Why didn't we see it?" Velrak's answer was quiet, bitter. "We saw it. We just refused to believe it." Across the galaxy, outposts scrambled to react. Patrol fleets from other species tried to enter abandoned human sectors, but the NAV points were gone. The jump gates locked. Entire regions of space became dead zones, as if swallowed by a void. Without human beacon data, even automated ships drifted aimlessly. It was as if humanity had sealed off their part of the stars and taken the key with them. By midnight, all human colonies were black. Their great shipyards, once blazing with the light of thousands of engines, now hung like graveyards in orbit. Vast stations drifted in silence. Some Council recon pilots who ventured too close swore they saw faint blue contrails in the distance, vanishing toward the rim of the galaxy. No signals, no words, just ghosts. "This can't be real," a Council aide whispered, voice shaking. "It's very real," Threya whispered back. "They've left." Velrak closed his eyes as the weight of the truth finally settled in. They had begged humanity to calm down. They had laughed when humanity warned of being pushed too far. They called them dramatic, overreacting, loud. But humans didn't shout this time. They simply left. And the silence they left behind was louder than any fleet, any war, any scream the galaxy had ever heard. Back in the Council chamber, the remaining holomap displayed only empty black voids where entire human star systems had once pulsed with life. Someone tried to overlay old backup maps to track them. All they found were locked sectors, red warnings, encrypted layers they couldn't crack. Humanity had thought of everything. They had built their escape quietly, in the shadows, and now the Council couldn't even follow their trail. Velrak stood tall, but his voice trembled as he finally spoke. This is the night the humans disappeared. And somewhere out there, past the edges of mapped space, hidden beyond the rim where no Council ship had ever dared to go, The human fleets were moving like a tide. No signal. No broadcast. No trace. Just silence. A silence the Council would never forget. The fleets arrived at the Terran border within hours, fast, coordinated, and desperate. But they were already too late. The Council warships moved through the empty star lanes like hunters entering a forest that had been cleared long ago. The beacons that once glowed bright along the trade routes were dead. The human patrol stations were cold and silent. Orbital lights that once pulsed with activity hung like frozen stars. There were no transmissions, no warnings, not even the static hum of civilian chatter. It was as if the entire human sector had been vacuumed out of existence, leaving nothing behind but the echo of what once was. Admiral Threa stood at the bridge of the Council flagship, her claws digging into the metal rail, staring at the massive projection screen that showed Earth's outer defense grid, or what remained of it. The rings of orbital platforms that had once been lined with Terran dreadnoughts were dark, dead like abandoned bones floating in orbit. She turned to her tactical officer, voice low. "Scan everything. Full sweep. I want a sign of life. Anything." The officer's hands flew over the console. Scanners swept the system, reaching into the farthest corners of Terran space. But nothing came back. No ships, no signals, only silence. A young lieutenant spoke, his voice shaking slightly. "Admiral, we're picking up large structures in orbit, sealed platforms. No active transmissions." Threa snapped, "Put it on screen." And then the image appeared, massive orbital platforms hovering silently around Earth's faded blue glow. Their steel hulls were coated in dark armor, thicker than anything the Council had ever seen. But what made everyone on the bridge fall silent were the glowing red words stamped across every platform's hull. "Do not follow." The letters burned bright, like a warning carved into the void itself. Velrak watched from the command chair, his scaled hands tightening. The warning wasn't a threat. It wasn't rage. It was a statement, cold and final, a line drawn in the stars. "What are they doing?" He whispered, but deep down he already knew. The humans weren't just gone. They had erased their road back. The Council fleet pushed deeper into human space, but every system they entered was the same story. Abandoned colonies with dead power grids, empty orbital docks, cities without a single light. It didn't look like war, it didn't look like destruction. It looked like a civilization that had calmly packed up and walked away, leaving behind nothing useful, nothing to steal, nothing to rebuild. Even their data cores were wiped clean, not corrupted, wiped. A clean surgical cut that left no trace. On one of the Council destroyers, a team of engineers boarded an abandoned human starport. Their boots echoed through the empty corridors like whispers in a tomb. There was no sign of struggle, no scorch marks, no blood, no chaos. Everything was neat, almost unnervingly so. Every piece of machinery had been disassembled with precision. Storage bays cleared out. Entire server banks gone. Only the walls remained, stripped down to metal and silence. A voice came through the comms from the engineering team. "Sir, it's like they knew we'd come." Threa responded sharply. "Of course they knew." Velrak stepped closer to the central holomap, his voice low. "This isn't abandonment," he said. "This is erasure." The counselors on the bridge exchanged uneasy glances, because they knew what that meant. Humanity didn't want to be followed. They had spent years building their escape in the shadows while the Council mocked them. And now their silence was louder than any weapon. One by one, Council fleets spread across the remaining Terran territories, searching for anything. Evidence of where they'd gone, coordinates, stray signals. But all they found were cold warnings and quiet stations. At the edge of the Sol system, a scout ship picked up something faint, a single object drifting beyond the last communication grid. When they brought it aboard, they found a beacon the size of a coffin. Inside it was a single line of text, displayed in every known language. "This is not our war anymore. Do not follow." The message spread through the fleet like a sickness. The crews whispered it in the halls. Captains repeated it under their breath. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone felt the same thing in their bones. Humanity hadn't run. It had chosen to leave, and that choice terrified them more than any enemy they had ever faced. Back in the main council chamber, Velrak stood in front of the gathered delegates, the hollow feeds from the fleets surrounding them, one after another showing the same empty worlds, abandoned starports, cold planets, empty orbitals, no resistance, no survivors, no hope, only the words, "Do not follow." The silence was unbearable. No one shouted, no one laughed, no one mocked, because deep down they all understood. This was the end of an age. Admiral Threya's voice came through the comms to the chamber, tired and dry. "We've checked every sector. There's nothing left. It's like they were never here." Velrak's eyes narrowed as he stared at the fleet projections. "They were here," he said softly. "And we were the fools who believed they would never leave." A counselor slammed his fist on the table, panic replacing arrogance. "They can't just leave the galaxy. It's impossible." Velrak turned his gaze slowly. "Impossible?" he whispered. "Tell me, when has anything ever been impossible for humanity?" The question cut through the room like a blade. In the following hours, the Council attempted everything. Decryption teams to break into old human networks, probes launched into deep space, fleets dispatched to their frontier. But every road was closed, every trail erased. The humans hadn't left a single breadcrumb behind. It was as if they were erasing their very shadow from the galaxy. One junior officer aboard a Council corvette whispered to another as they drifted past an abandoned Terran moon base. "They didn't run," he said softly. "They're waiting." His partner frowned. "Waiting for what?" The officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. That night, across every Council capital, the same message echoed in hidden corners of fear. "They left, and they told us not to follow." But the galaxy had grown too used to human power. Too used to their trade, their fleets, their hands holding everything together, and the void they left behind was already starting to swallow everything. It wasn't just the humans who had disappeared. It was stability itself. And the Council was about to learn what a galaxy without humanity truly felt like. The begging started slowly, like a wave that no one wanted to admit was rising. At first, the Council told themselves it wasn't serious, that humanity would come back, that humans were just making some loud political move to grab attention. After all, hadn't they always made noise when they were unhappy? The chamber whispered excuses like frightened children in the dark. But outside their marble walls, the galaxy was already beginning to crack. The trade lines that had depended on human convoys grew silent. Pirate raids returned to the outer sectors. Fleets that once dared not cross Terran patrol zones now swarmed like hungry wolves. The economy that had thrived under human trade started to bleed. Systems began to panic. By the third day, the first desperate messages began arriving at the Council. Trade guilds screamed about failing routes. Colonies begged for protection. Smaller nations that had always leaned on human patrol fleets reported pirate invasions and border collapses. None of the Council fleets could fill the gap. They were too few, too slow, too weak to match what humanity had built. For centuries, the Council had hidden behind Terran strength while pretending it wasn't there. Now, stripped of that shield, they saw the truth clearly, and it terrified them. In the great hall of the Council, delegates shouted over one another. Their once calm, arrogant voices now cracked with panic. Velrak sat at the high seat. His claws pressed hard into the polished table as the storm of voices echoed through the chamber. "They can't just abandon the galaxy like this," one counselor roared. "They can, and they did," Admiral Threya replied, her voice quiet but sharp. "And we helped push them out the door." Counselor Zarek slammed his palm against the desk. "We have to call them back. Offer something, anything. We need them." "Need them?" Someone spat back. "You called them parasites not 5 years ago. Now you're begging." The argument grew louder, but beneath all the shouting, fear was the only real sound. Velrak finally rose from his seat. His voice, once used to command respect, sounded tired now. "Enough," he said, and the shouting fell silent. "They gave us warning after warning. We laughed. We mocked. And now they are gone. The galaxy is already shaking without them." His words were heavy because everyone in that chamber knew they were true. That night, the Council sent its first transmission to the void. A simple call broadcasted across every frequency humanity had once used, their voice filled with forced confidence. "This is the Galactic Council," the message began. "We invite humanity to return to the table of diplomacy. Whatever wrongs you believe were done can be discussed. We can rebuild together." The message was sent. No reply came. Not in a minute. Not in an hour. Not in a day. By the 5th day, the begging grew more desperate. The council sent promises this time, not words. Promises of shared control, of equal seats of power, of military pacts they once mocked. They even offered something they had never offered anyone: leadership over the border defense fleet. Silence. Across the galaxy, the effects of humanity's absence were growing sharper. Entire supply lines collapsed. Colonies that had once thrived because of Terran merchants fell into chaos. On distant outer worlds, terrified people whispered one name over and over again: humans. They had kept the wolves at bay, and now the wolves had returned. On the 12th day, fleets from smaller civilizations docked at council space demanding answers. Their leaders shouted in the same chamber where humanity's warnings had once been dismissed. "You told us the humans were reckless," one shouted. "You said we didn't need them," another bellowed. "Now everything is burning." Velrak didn't argue. He couldn't. The council called an emergency meeting that night, the largest in its history. Their fleets were stretched thin. Their economy was cracking. Their colonies were falling apart. And humanity had not sent a single word. Not even an insult. Not even a warning. Admiral Threya leaned against the table, her voice lower than ever before. "They don't hate us," she said quietly. "If they hated us, they would have stayed and fought. They just don't care anymore. And that's worse." Zarek's voice shook. "Then we beg louder. We offer more. We give them everything they want." "They don't want anything," Velrak said, each word cold. "They're finished with us." But the begging still continued. Hundreds of council ambassadors were sent to the empty human worlds. They landed on abandoned colonies, stood in front of cold walls, and shouted their pleas into the wind. They sent endless broadcasts into deep space, repeating promises, apologies, offers of wealth and power. The council had spent centuries laughing at the noise of humanity. Now they were the ones screaming into the void. And the void answered them with silence. On the 20th day, the galaxy began to fracture. Old enemies rose. Pirates grew bolder. Trade collapsed. War whispers spread through the outer systems. The council realized too late that the strength of their galaxy had never been their laws or their fleets. It had been the humans who held everything together through sheer force of will. And now, when they needed that strength the most, humanity had turned its back on them. Not with hatred, but with silence. Velrak stood alone in the chamber that night, staring at the black screens where the Terran relay once pulsed. His reflection stared back at him in the polished glass. "We begged too late," he whispered to himself. "We begged when they had already stopped listening." And far away, beyond the rim of the galaxy, where no council fleet could reach, humanity traveled in silence, building something new. Something the council would never touch again. Weeks passed and the silence only grew heavier, like a storm cloud that refused to move. The council chambers were no longer filled with mockery or loud debates. Now they were filled with desperation. Their broadcasts had gone unanswered. Their fleets were stretched thin. Their colonies were crumbling at the edges, and still humanity said nothing, no signal, no voice, no response. It was on the 27th day that it finally happened. A faint pulse appeared on the deep space network. At first the technicians thought it was static, another ghost reading from abandoned Terran channels. But the pulse repeated with a rhythm that no machine could confuse. It was deliberate. It was human. Inside the council's central operations hub, alarms flashed yellow as comm officers shouted over one another, scrambling to trace the signal. Their hands moved fast across glowing interfaces, trying to decode it before it vanished. Admiral Threya was the first to arrive, her face hard and pale. "Where is it coming from?" she barked, but the technician's voice shook. "It's not coming from Earth, not from any human territory. It's coming from beyond the rim." The room fell silent. Beyond the rim was nothing. Uncharted void. Dangerous, unstable, unmapped. No council fleet had ever dared to venture there. The signal continued. A steady, heartbeat-like pulse. No speech. No language. Just that sound. Velrak entered the room slowly, his steps heavy as if the weight of the last few weeks was carved into his bones. "Put it on main display," he ordered, and the holoprojector flickered to life. A A simple string of text appeared on the black screen, glowing in soft white. One sentence, written in every known language of the Council. We offered unity. You offered laughter. We walk alone now. The chamber went silent. The sentence hung in the air like a blade pressing against their throats. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was final. A young counselor whispered, "They're not even angry." Threya clenched her jaw, her claws digging into the table. "No, they're finished with us." The technicians tried to trace the signal's exact coordinates, but the moment they came close, the pulse faded, like a ghost disappearing into the dark. A second later, the entire network went dead again. The signal was gone, but the damage it left behind was sharper than any weapon. For hours after, the Council sat in silence, staring at the empty hollow map of human space. The pulse replayed in their heads over and over again. We walk alone now. That night, emergency meetings filled the Council's schedule. Delegates shouted across the table, some demanding that the Council launch a fleet beyond the rim to find them, others screaming that following humanity into the void would be suicide. "We can't survive without them," one delegate shouted. "Trade is collapsing, borders are falling apart, our colonies are begging for aid. And what are we going to do if we find them?" Another barked back, "Beg some more. They gave us their answer." The shouting grew until Velrak slammed his hand down on the table. The sound echoed through the chamber, forcing silence. "They didn't give us their answer today," he said slowly. "They gave it to us years ago. We just refused to listen." Admiral Threya stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the dark screen. "We always called them loud," she muttered. "Now their silence is louder than anything they ever said." Outside the chambers, the galaxy was changing fast. Without human fleets to patrol the trade routes, pirate lords had carved new territories. Worlds that once relied on Terran supply chains faced famine. Border colonies fell into chaos, and the smaller civilizations who had once looked up to the Council began to turn away. The entire galactic order was unraveling like thread being pulled apart. A secret intelligence report landed on Velrak's desk that night. It contained scattered deep space scans, faint energy signatures at the very edge of the galaxy. No clear visuals, just shadows of something moving in the dark. Massive objects, thousands of them. "Human ships," Threya whispered when she saw the report. "They're not hiding," Velrak said softly. "They're watching." Panic began to spread across Council space. Rumors exploded like wildfire. People said humanity had built a new empire beyond the rim. Others said they had created weapons too powerful to comprehend. Some whispered that they were building a wall to keep the rest of the galaxy out forever. The Council tried to control the narrative, but it was like trying to hold water in their hands. The pulse had reached the civilian networks too. Billions had heard the message. Billions repeated it in the streets, in markets, in dark corners of colonies. "We offered unity. You offered laughter. We walk alone now." It became a symbol of their failure. In the following days, a few desperate Council factions tried to send ships beyond the rim. None returned. Whether they were destroyed or simply turned back, no one knew. All that came back was silence. The begging stopped then, not because they no longer needed humanity, but because everyone finally understood the truth. Humanity wasn't listening anymore. They had crossed a line not of war but of choice. Admiral Threya stood alone on the observation deck of the Council flagship, staring at the starfield, the empty darkness beyond their known space. "We thought they needed us," she whispered to herself. "But we were the ones who needed them." Velrak joined her, silent for a long time before speaking. "They gave us every chance to stand beside them," he said slowly, "and we laughed in their faces. Now they've gone where we can't follow." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The pulse echoed again in the silence of their minds, not from a speaker, not from a signal, but from memory. "We walk alone now." And far beyond the rim, in a region of space no Council ship could touch, human fleets drifted silently, not lost, not broken, but united, building something new. Something the Council would never again be part of. Their silence was not weakness. It was power. It was a final answer. The stars above the council capital burned cold that night, quiet and distant, and for the first time in living memory, no Terran patrol ship passed through those skies, no Terran traders docked at the ports, no human voices filled the comm channels. The galaxy had grown used to the background hum of humanity. Their fleets, their chatter, their noise, but now, the silence felt like a wound. It was a silence the council could not escape, no matter how many meetings they held, no matter how many signals they sent. It wasn't the kind of silence that could be fixed. It was the kind that came after a door had been closed forever. Velrak stood alone on the grand balcony of the council tower, overlooking the city that once boasted about being the heart of the galaxy. The streets below were not filled with celebration or order anymore. They were filled with protests, fear, and whispers. Giant banners that once showed the might of the council now hung limp in the wind. For centuries, they had believed they were the center of everything. But that center had only existed because humanity had kept the edges of the galaxy from falling apart. Now the edges were burning, and the center was crumbling. Reports came in every hour. Trade networks collapsing. Border colonies falling into chaos. Pirate fleets growing stronger. Systems once loyal to the council now declaring independence. Small wars breaking out over scraps. The council had always believed it was untouchable, but without humanity's steady, loud, stubborn presence, the galaxy was nothing but fragile glass. And now that glass was cracking. Inside the council chamber, the delegates no longer argued with confidence. Their voices shook. Their faces were pale. They looked like people who had finally understood how much they had lost. "This is unsustainable," one counselor said, voice trembling. "We are losing sectors faster than we can respond. Without Terran trade," another added, "half of our colonies will starve within the year." The supply routes were theirs. The technology was theirs. "And what do you want us to do?" Admiral Threya barked, slamming her hand on the table. "We begged them. We offered them power. They didn't even look back." A deep silence followed. No one argued with her, because they all knew she was right. Velrak rose from his seat slowly. Once, his presence commanded the entire chamber. Now, it only carried the weight of a man who knew he had already lost. "We didn't offer them power," he said softly, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We offered them scraps, after years of mocking them. And by the time we opened our hands, they were already gone." Counselor Zarek stood, his fins trembling. "Then we send fleets beyond the rim. We go after them. We can't survive without them." Threya turned her eyes on him, and there was no arrogance left in her, only something cold. "Do you remember the message they left us?" she asked. Zarek swallowed. "Yes, do not follow." "Then tell me," Threya said slowly, "what happens if we disobey a species that built ships we can't even track?" The room fell silent again. Because everyone knew the truth, they didn't even have the strength to follow humanity now. Their fleets were stretched too thin, their resources were failing, and the humans were somewhere beyond the edge of the map. A place the council had never dared to go. Outside, the riots grew louder. Ordinary citizens were not fools. They knew who had kept the galaxy safe. They remembered the human convoys that brought food to dying colonies, the Terran fleets that hunted down the pirates no one else wanted to fight, the engineers who repaired broken jump gates that the council ignored. For years, people had hated humanity because it was easy. Now they feared their absence because it was real. "They're not coming back," Threya whispered, mostly to herself. Velrak stared at the dark ceiling of the chamber. "No," he said. "They're not." The council could still see the traces of human movement on old star maps. Their abandoned trade hubs, their erased jump gate routes, their sealed star platforms. It wasn't a disappearance. It was a clean, deliberate retreat. Humanity had chosen to walk away from the galaxy and leave it to its own decay. One of the younger delegates, barely old enough to remember the old wars, spoke softly. "Why didn't they fight us? Why didn't they strike back? They could have crushed us." Velrak gave a bitter laugh, low and hollow. "Because we weren't worth their time. That is what true power looks like. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need to explain itself. It simply leaves." The words settled like ash. For decades, the Council had measured power in fleets and weapons. Humanity had shown them something different: power in silence. Power in walking away. As the night deepened, Velrak left the chamber and returned to the balcony. He stared at the stars that stretched far beyond what their fleets could reach. Somewhere out there, humanity was building something new, something vast, something free from the Council's chains. They didn't leave because they were weak. They left because they were too strong to stay chained to those who never respected them. He closed his eyes for a moment. In the wind, it almost felt like he could still hear the echo of their last words. We offered unity. You offered laughter. We walk alone now. That was the final scar the Council would carry. Not from war, not from destruction, but from silence. Humanity had taken its noise, its fire, its strength, and vanished beyond the rim. And the galaxy, once so loud and proud, now trembled beneath the weight of its own mistake. History would remember it as the day the galaxy begged too late. And every night after, the Council looked up at the stars, wondering not if humanity would return, but whether, if they ever did, the galaxy would even deserve it.